Hello, history buffs, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most pivotal and dramatic events in the history of the Americas, the fall of the mighty Aztec capital Tenochtitlan. This wasn't just a battle, it was the final brutal act in the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, a clash of worlds that forever changed the course of history. It all happened in 1521, a 75-day siege from May to August that culminated in the end of the Mexica era and the beginning of Spanish colonial rule. But how did it come to this? How did a few hundred Spaniards, even with their advanced weaponry, manage to topple an empire of millions? The story is far more complex than you might think. Let's rewind to July 1520. A battered and bruised Hernan Cortes and his army, fresh from their disastrous retreat from Tenochtitlan known as La Noche Triste, the Sad Night, found refuge in the lands of their allies. The new Aztec Emperor Cuitlahuac tried to form an alliance with the Tlaxcalans, offering them peace if they would just hand over Cortes. But the Tlaxcalans, longtime rivals of the Aztecs, saw an opportunity. They refused Cuitlahuac's offer and doubled down on their alliance with the Spanish, hungry for revenge against their old overlords. By Tenochtitlan, Cuitlahuac was trying to consolidate his power. He even sacrificed the Spanish prisoners and horses captured during La Noche Triste, placing their heads on the great skull rack, the Zampantle, as a grim warning. But a far more insidious enemy was already within the city walls. Smallpox, brought to the continent by an enslaved African man in a separate Spanish expedition, was ravaging the native population. Tragically, Cuitlahuac himself would succumb to the disease in November after ruling for only a few months. His death created a power vacuum and further destabilized the empire at its most critical moment. With the Aztecs weakened, Cortes saw his chance, but he wasn't just fighting the Aztecs, he was fighting for his own survival. He had defied the governor of Cuba, Diego Velázquez, to undertake this conquest. Failure meant returning to Spanish territory as a traitor, facing prison or worse. Success, however, meant glory, immense wealth, and a royal pardon. For Cortes, there was no turning back. His strategy was simple but effective: divide and conquer. He began a campaign to win over or subdue the many city-states that paid tribute to the Aztecs. One of his biggest coups was securing the allegiance of Texcoco, ironically a former partner in the Aztec-Triple Alliance. Cortes installed a pro-Spanish noble Extil Sequira II as the new ruler, giving him a crucial strategic base on the shores of Lake Texcoco, which surrounded Tenochtitlan. He also knew he couldn't take the island city by land alone. The causeways that connected Tenochtitlan to the mainland had been his undoing during La Noche Triste. This time, he would control the water. He commissioned the construction of 13 small, maneuverable warships called brigands. These vessels were built in Tlaxcala and then painstakingly carried piece by piece over the mountains to be reassembled at the lake. It was a monumental feat of engineering and logistics, while the Spanish were building their fleets and consolidating alliances. The new and final Aztec emperor, the young and fierce Cuauhtémoc, was not idle. He sent out his warriors to try and stop the Spanish advance, but his forces were stretched thin, battling not only the Spanish and their growing number of native allies, but also the devastating smallpox epidemic. Cortes continued his relentless march, capturing key towns like Calco and in one skirmish. Cortes himself was nearly captured but was saved by the heroic intervention of a soldier named Cristobal de Alia. By the spring of 1521, the noose was tightening. Tenochtitlan was almost completely isolated. With his preparations complete, Cortes amassed a formidable army. He had around 1,300 Spanish soldiers, but his real strength lay in his indigenous allies. He commanded a massive force of an estimated 200,000 warriors from Tlaxcala, Texcoco, Cholula, and many other states, all united by a common desire to see the downfall of their former Aztec oppressors. Before the final assault, Cortes had to deal with one last bit of internal strife. A prominent Tlaxcalan war chief, Xicotencatl who had always distrusted the Spanish, deserted the army, fearing his betrayal could unravel the entire alliance. Cortes had him captured and executed. On May 22, 1521, the siege officially began. Cortes divided his forces into three main divisions to block the three major causeways leading into the city. Pedro de Alvarado was stationed at Tlacopan, Cristobal de Olid at Cayocan, and Gonzalo de Sandoval at Cortes himself took command of the naval fleet of brigands. Their first move was to cut off the city's fresh water supply by destroying the aqueduct at the initial battles were fierce. The Aztecs fought with incredible bravery from both land in their thousands of war canoes, but the Spanish brigantines proved to be against. These floating fortresses, armed with cannons, dominated the lake, sinking Aztec canoes and providing crucial support to the ground troops on the causeways. Cuauhtémoc, a brilliant strategist, quickly adapted. His warriors set traps and dug pits on the causeways and placed sharpened stakes in the lake bed to try and cripple the Spanish horses and ships. The fighting was relentless every day. The Spanish and their allies would fight their way onto the causeways, only to retreat at night, allowing the Aztecs to retake and rebuild their defenses. Realizing this wasn't working, Cortes changed tactics. He ordered his men to advance slowly and methodically, destroying every building as they went and using the rubble to fill in the canals. They would no longer retreat at night, but instead camp on the ground they had won. It was a slow, grueling process of attrition. The Aztecs refused to yield. In one major counterattack, they managed to ambush a Spanish force, capturing around 60 Spaniards from their positions. The horrified allies could only watch as their comrades were marched up the steps of the great temple and sacrificed to the Aztec gods. To further terrorize their enemies, the Aztecs would throw the severed heads and limbs of the sacrificed into the Spanish camps. The psychological toll was immense, and some of the native allies, seeing the seemingly unbreakable Aztec resistance, abandoned the siege. But Cortes was patient. His strategy of total blockade was working. With all supply lines cut, starvation and thirst began to take hold inside the city. The people were reduced to eating lizards, insects, tree bark, and even clay. Dysentery ran rampant from drinking the salty, contaminated lake water. The city was dying from the inside. Slowly, painstakingly, the Spanish and their remaining allies pushed deeper into the city. The final assault was aimed at the marketplace of Tlatelolco, the last major Aztec stronghold. After days of brutal house-to-house fighting, Alvarado's division was the first to reach the Great Pyramid there, planting the Spanish flag at its summit. It was a symbolic and devastating blow. With the city's main defenses broken, the allied native warriors, unleashed after centuries of Aztec oppression, fell upon the starving population. The accounts describe a horrific massacre with thousands of men, women, and children being killed in a frenzy of revenge that even the Spanish could not control. Cuauhtémoc and his most loyal followers made their last stand in a small corner of the city. When all was lost, they attempted to flee across the lake in canoes, but they were intercepted by a Spanish brigantine commanded by Garcia Hogan. The capture of the emperor on August 13, 1521, marked the definitive end. After 75 days of unimaginable suffering and ferocious resistance, the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan had fallen. The fall of Tenochtitlan was more than just the end of a siege. It was the collapse of a civilization and the violent birth of a new nation. The ruins of the Aztec capital would become the foundation for Mexico City, the capital of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. It's a complex and often painful story, but one that is absolutely essential to understanding the history of Mexico and the Americas as a whole. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the past. See you next time.